千里之行，始于足下。A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. Welcome to Tao Talks with Derek Lin, where we take a deep dive into the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. I would like to extend a warm welcome to you. Thank you for joining us. I would like to invite you to center your thoughts and direct your attention to this moment in time, to the here and now, to be fully present and mindfully aware as we all ready ourselves for this sacred process in the Tao with one another. Here in this slide, you'll see Xiao, filial piety. So both the Chinese and English. As we talked about in the previous slide, the essence of filial piety is about respect and reverence. In addition to respecting one's elders, the concept of Xiao also includes reverence for one's ancestors. Now, that's how it is in the East in general. In the West, we certainly do see that many people, create good relationships with their parents, and we see that as a positive thing. But having that good relationship doesn't get nearly the same cultural emphasis as it does in the East. That is why, over there, the emphasis extends beyond parents and grandparents to include all ancestors. Of course, no one can really have an actual interaction with ancestors who are long gone. So the expression of Xiao in that case is ceremonial or ritualistic in nature. Previously, addressing the ceremonial nature of it, we touched on this topic as part of our discussion for Tao Te Ching 54. In the first 3 lines, 54 talks about the Tao. That which is well established cannot be uprooted. I would like to ask everyone to focus especially on the uprooted parts of the first line. This becomes significant in this chapter, especially later on. Line 2, that which is strongly held cannot be taken. Line 3, the descendants will commemorate it forever. So today, I have an opportunity to follow up on this previous discussion on 54, provide additional clarification, more insights. In the West, this commemoration is usually called ancestor worship, which does not reflect its true meaning. And this is the contents, the overview that I provided back when we had that initial discussion in Tao Te Ching 54. So this is the part 2 of that discussion. A lot of people in the West don't know much about this commemoration of ancestors or assume it has a religious significance. Ancestor worship is seen as a religious practice. Previously, what I pointed out was that some people guess that the Chinese practice ancestor worship perhaps due to fear, perhaps out to appease ancestral spirits who may be displeased or angry if neglected. So I want to showcase that this is actually not the case. Number two, I mentioned that there is a fundamentalist religious teaching in the West that speaks of ancestral worship as being equivalent to devil worship. I know it sounds extreme, but it's definitely out there. And lastly, those who are not quite as extreme might still consider ancestor worship to be a primitive, superstitious practice. In the earlier discussion, I mentioned this prominent expression, 饮水思源. This time, I want to show the characters, break them down, and take you through the steps in the reasoning process and the application of its meaning. This is what I meant by going into greater depth and providing additional details and insights. So, when you look at the breakdown of these four characters, drink water, think source, that is already a pretty good translation as it is. And the meaning, as I talked about before, is that when you drink water, think of the source. The saying applies to both filial piety toward one's parents or grandparents, one's elders, and ancestor worship. It applies to both of those concepts. In fact, I would say within Chinese culture, this is the one idiomatic expression that is always associated with both since ancient times. Dynasties may come and go, but this expression has remained constant through all that. It's always remained the same. And that sort of underlines the cultural significance. So let me talk about the steps of the meaning. First, the surface level. As you quench your thirst, don't forget the spring or well where you got the water. When you drink water, think of its source. Without that source, you would not be drinking deeply. And beyond the surface level, the second step is to generalize the meaning to cover everything. When you enjoy a goodness, remember where it came from, like the water you were drinking. What brought you the good fortune? Who was the one that did you a favor? Who was your benefactor? To keep that person or circumstance in mind. Then, the third step is to apply the idea to your own existence. As you live and cherish your life, keep its source in mind. And what is the source of your life? Of course, it is your parents who are the source. Before them, the grandparents are the source of your parents. Then, great grandparents, and so on, to include all of your ancestors. It's just the basic idea that one should never take one's own existence for granted. Without your ancestors, you would not be here. You would not be around. You would not exist. If they hadn't lived and survived, it's a good thing that they did, or you would not have your life. So just as you cherish it, your life, it makes sense that you should cherish them. They're the ones who paved the way. So never feel entitled or take goodness for granted. This is the real essence of ancestor worship. It is a state of grace known as gratitude, therefore especially suitable for us to discuss it now. It's a nice coincidence. This sense of gratitude is a feeling that you are uniquely blessed. You are the last link in an unimaginably long chain of human beings stretching all the way back to the genesis of humanity, and before that, the genesis of life itself. You feel very much as a part of this ancient tradition, and that realization gives you power and strength. So anchor your thoughts to appreciation and reciprocation. In this regard, so-called ancestor worship is not necessarily a superstitious practice, because one does not need to believe in the existence of ghosts or spiritual beings to feel a sense of gratitude and appreciation. Likewise, when you express that gratitude and appreciation through some sort of ceremonial ritual, it doesn't have to be an endorsement of the supernatural. So we can see it has nothing to do with fear, because it is actually sourced in gratitude and appreciation. And I would actually point to that as the highest level of human emotions. And, of course, now it is clear the so-called ancestor worship has nothing to do with devil worship. So how do we get that so wrong as a culture? Well, here are the characters for ancestor worship. 拜祖先. Let me break it down for you. It's in two parts. The first character means revere, 拜. The second and third characters together, 祖先, they mean ancestors. So the mistranslation of this expression ends up as cultural misunderstanding, because in a religious context, 拜, the first character, means worship. So straightforward translation of that seems to be what results in what we call ancestor worship. Just like it is with the Tao Te Ching itself. Mistranslation leads to misunderstanding. And I have said many times before that the vast majority of Tao Te Ching translations out there in the West contain outright mistakes, mistranslation from the slight errors to egregious. But that's okay. We are together to set the record straight. Back to filial piety and 拜祖先. Bai, the first character in this context, does not actually mean worship at all. It actually means pay respect. So, knowing that, I think in the West, we don't necessarily need to have a tough time understanding this concept. Now that we see the connotation of the word worship is primarily religious, with implications of deities and supplicants. When people don't have any other information, it is natural to assume that the Chinese worship their ancestors as some kind of gods, some sort of deities. In reality, the ritual is a communion. It's no different than praying to the departed. Now, certainly, the Chinese people, by and large, believe their ancestors exist as spiritual entities. But to go from there to godhood is a stretch, to say the least. When we see that it's a communion, it's a commemoration, by its nature, it is different from praying to deities as we know the concept. It's expressing reverence, paying respects. These would all be closer to the context than the translation worship. When Chinese people hold incense sticks in their hands and face the ancestral shrine or gravestone, they are in fact having a silent prayer to the dead. The content of their prayers have to do with greetings to the ancestors, the paying of respects, and the invitation to the ancestors to share a meal with the family, thus the offering of food, and a request to watch over the safety of family members, like a guardian angel. Then the family will sit down, having done the ceremony, they will gather together to share the meal together. And in this way, the tradition is a treasure moment, a cherished tradition that brings family members closer together. Now, when you look at the essence of these actions and what actually goes on in the mind, I think we quickly come to the realization that people do the exact same thing in the West. That is, we too in the West pray to the dead without ever thinking of that as a form of worship. We know in the West, when we pray to the departed, it is not religious in nature. It's different from praying to God or Jesus, because you would not be asking the dear departed for forgiveness of your sins. There's no request for the dear departed to give you strength in the battle of good versus evil. As I mentioned, it is much more like a prayer to a guardian angel rather than a deity. Finally, let me return to what I started out with. I said that filial piety is emphasized the most, like no other virtue, within Chinese culture. This is the expression for that. 百善孝为先. Let me break down the characters for you. The first character means 100. The second character, 善, means goodness. The third character, the one in the middle, you can see that it's the same character as the Chinese character in the title. It means filial piety. And then we have a character for is. And the last character is foremost. So if you string that together, you get 100 goodnesses. Filial piety is foremost. You kind of can see the meaning. Here is the expanded version of that. Out of all the virtues, being a good son or daughter with love and respect for the parents is first and foremost. Why do they say that? It is because 孝 is the most basic manifestation of gratitude. Therefore, people who are good to their parents, people who treat their elders with love and respect, they must fundamentally have a positive nature. They are likely the ones who appreciate a goodness done to them. They're likely to not take it for granted. So they will naturally, at some point, either reciprocate the goodness or pay it forward to benefit even more people. So you can tell if you want to judge the character of a person, a good way to start is to notice how they treat their parents. If that relationship is good, then chances are the person is fundamentally a good person. And let me also pause and mention that when we look at the world, a lot of times it can be rather tricky to figure out who are the good and the bad people. So this can serve as a rule of thumb for a quick assessment, should you have the opportunity to see that interaction. Other ways to judge people's character may be how they treat the people who serve them, like the waiter or waitress. Those who are arrogant and dismissive may not have the positive nature that we're looking for. Now, let me pivot to the perspective provided by Lao Tzu. On the face of it, it seems like it's a very positive thing to emphasize filial piety as a virtue. But then, in this chapter, what Lao Tzu says is that it's only because the Tao is no longer prevalent in the world, the Tao has faded, that you have to emphasize. Having to remind or emphasize, it just means that naturalness has been lost. That love in the family is no longer there naturally. It no longer flows naturally, spontaneously, without prompting. And Confucianism has been a very strong proponent of filial piety throughout the thousands of years of Chinese history. And this makes sense when we examine the origin of Confucius. He too lived through the Warring Stage period, when the ancient land of China was full of chaos and warfare. This absolutely made it necessary for him to advocate the emphasis for the family as one of the ways to bring back unity, peace, and order. But Lao Tzu is reminding us that, well, if it is a forced virtue, it is not effortless. It requires effort. People have to work at it. And if it is not coming from the heart, it will not be genuine. The result can be pretentious and artificial. The feeling not coming from the heart will simply not be authentic. And in fact, the more you force it, the less authentic it becomes. So the reminder from Lao Tzu basically says that family love should be natural. And it is already part of the Tao. So a family that is in tune with the Tao will naturally draw closer together. They don't need any reminders at all. And now, back to the lines written by Lao Tzu. The 6 relations are not harmonious. There is filial piety and kind affection. I think you can see the real meaning Lao Tzu wanted to convey is a level deeper than the surface meaning of the characters. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.